I want you to make it stop. I didn't start it, but you could end it. I am not certain that is true. Though, even if I could, I am not certain I would. You're enjoying this. Not particularly. I have very little interest in a constant reminder that the person I loved most in the world was a lying, cheating W. I am not sure why. It's not like I had said anything that she hadn't heard before, but I could tell that this time it had stung, if only just a bit. And besides, I am smarter now. Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake. Sun Tzu?
Napoleon.
I had been woefully unprepared for the total devastation that had been hurled upon me during our first conflict. I wasn't prepared this time either, but, fortunately, I also wasn't alone. The rumors had started months earlier. People were whispering everywhere I went. The economy was tanking. A job, any job, was worth its weight in gold, and layoffs were on the horizon. Walking the factory floor was bad enough. With eyes following my every move, people stopping me when they thought no one was looking, asking me if I had seen the list. But I was getting it much worse at home. Melanie was near panic, asking me, every day, if I had heard anything. Did I still have a job? Was I sure? What was my plan? What were we going to do? I didn't have a plan. I didn't need one. My boss was a good man and he had my back. He had looked me in the eye and told me not to worry. So I hadn't. And it would have been fine if he had been the one making the final decisions and other people hadn't intervened. If there were signs, I missed them. There were some possibilities. I recognized after it was much too late. Our life had taken a noticeable dip. I thought it was stress. I knew I wasn't in the mood as much as I had been before. I guess I thought it was my fault more than hers. Then there was the fact that Melanie knew, before I had stepped 1 foot into the house, I had been laid off. My boss was dumbfounded as he told me that the man with the highest team production and best quality rating was lost from his staff. Melanie wasn't even surprised. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be my only long-term commitment that was about to get blown to hell. Melanie gave me absolutely no hint that our marriage was in trouble. She went through the motions of a dutiful wife with ease. Loving embraces, kisses on the cheek, keeping me well-fed and the house spotless. She was so much more of a Susie homemaker during those last few weeks. She never let me leave the room without telling me she loved me, probably to mask her guilt. I was served while waiting in line for my turn to access the company-sponsored outplacement resources. I came home to find the locks changed, my clothes boxed and in the driveway with another copy of the restraining order placed neatly on top. My severance package should have lasted for months, but I was almost immediately forced to choose. Should I use my remaining funds to fight the divorce and for custody of my daughter, or to live? I chose to fight, but I was simply outmatched. Lawyers, psychologists, judges all came to the same conclusion. I was a mentally abusive, unfit parent. I was unemployed and without means to care for a child. I was worthless. They said so in writing, all legal-like. The final blow came when I had my last harebrained idea. If I could just speak to April face-to-face, she would listen to me. At the time, she was 9, old enough to tell them that she loved her daddy and that she wanted to see me and that we were like peas in a pod. And so I stood in the darkness, behind the bushes, hoping to see her, staring at what used to be my house. That was the first time I saw them together. My wife, my daughter, and the company vice president of operations. He was the son of my former company's founder and a womanizer, and a whole and perhaps the worst business manager ever to hold an executive position. But his old man was respected, and people were loyal, and the only ruin life was mine. And I was a nobody. They had all said so. He was a strange-looking man, 10 years my senior, with an expanding waistline, a large checkbook, and my pre-made family. I would be the first one to admit that my description was biased by my hatred. He wasn't deformed or anything, but all I could see was ugliness. That was the night I took my first drink. Not my first ever, but the first one I took to mask my pain. It was a long drink. It lasted a year. It might have lasted forever, but I saw her one more time. I was wandering the streets. Unkempt facial hair, unwashed clothes, and a foul odor that announced my presence long before I arrived. I was a couple of weeks away from being homeless, if you could call my dilapidated studio apartment in the nearly condemned pre-war era building a home. She was coming out of one of the downtown boutiques, bags weighing down her arms, searching her designer purse for the keys to her luxury SUV. I think I frightened her. In fact, I know I did. She was momentarily at a loss for what to do next, shield her possessions or her body. The drunken haze that shielded me from the real world meant she was in no danger from me. It took me far too long to recognize her. The "oh my God," and her hands covering her mouth in shock before she started her car and drove off finally registered several minutes later. A few minutes after that, I stole the beer bottle from the convenience store. That was why I was searching for the bottle opener. I was too stupid to lift one with a twist-off cap, and Melanie had rearranged the kitchen utensils again. For no damn good reason. I couldn't find the bottle opener. After the bottle was smashed and the contents of all but one drawer were tossed onto the floor, I found it. There was no Melanie, it wasn't our home, and the bottle opener was right where I left it. Right where it should have been. Everything had been in its place. I stopped drinking that day and left my hometown the next with a backpack full of everything I owned and almost $50 to my name. It wasn't hard to stop. I wasn't an alcoholic. I was a broken man trying to hide in a bottle. And failing. Is everything an inspirational quote with you now? Not always. Not everything inspires someone. Sometimes things are just a reminder of where we have been. What the F, Braden? What does that even mean? I have no idea what it means to you, but, frankly, I have no interest in explaining what anything means to me. Especially to you. I wandered for 18 months that first time, walking, hitchhiking, and taking the occasional bus. I worked odd jobs until I had enough cash to move on. Money was tight, but my eyes were open. I put up camp wherever I found myself. There was always someplace to lay my head, grab a shower, snag a meal. I indulged myself with anything that looked interesting from any used bookstore I passed. I could grab a dozen books for the price of one movie. So I read. I wrote down anything that I wanted to remember and anything that I was feeling in an old, worn spiral-bound notebook. It was a diary of pain and discovery. I kept up on world events with newspapers that others had discarded. They were often out of date, but the news that filled those pages didn't really affect me anyway. And I talked to people. Well, listen mostly. People like to talk, and I was a good listener. I splurged once on a well-used digital camera from a pawn shop. I took pictures so that I could remember the locations I had been, people that I had met, and, much later in my journey, things that had inspired me. About once a month, and for around $5, one of the chain drugstores would transfer all my pictures from my memory card to compact disc. After a year and a half, I settled in a dusty little town in the middle of the country. I worked my first, post-divorce, full-time job in the warehouse of a fertilizer factory. During the day I slaved away, hauling things, and at night I retired to my rented room above the local garage to read and write. I exchanged my notebook for a used laptop and spent my free days at the local library using their free internet to load my thoughts and pecutors to a blog. People followed me, commented anonymously, and, though I was writing as a cathartic alternative to therapy, I enjoyed knowing that people were interested in what I had to say. I enjoyed it a lot. Melanie paused at the only picture that I had of my former family, a strip of photographs from a booth at an amusement park. April was 4 years old at the time. Her ponytail wrapped in pink ribbons, and her newly pierced ears shimmered with the fake diamond studs. The overly bright flash couldn't compete with the smiles on the faces of the three subjects. Each captured the moment. The first was surprised, the next silly, and then genuine laughter. I could help you get in touch with her. Help you reconnect. Oh, so you're close? Down with all the latest comings and goings of your daughter? I could see her try and search my gaze for information. It must have been hard for her not to have the upper hand, to not be a step ahead, to be wondering what I knew or didn't know. You should be proud. She's turned out to be just like you. I saw the shock in her eyes at that comment. Something else, too. Maybe regret? She stopped to look at that one, too. I think she was surprised that the images didn't match her memories. Or maybe what she'd been told. It's hard to say for sure, because she didn't comment. I never thought of myself as a writer. In my former life, I was a production supervisor for a large manufacturing company because that was my job title after my 4th promotion. I had started at the bottom and worked my way up. I had never been a writer, never dreamed of writing. But that didn't stop an online men's magazine from listing my blog as one of the best of the web. And it didn't stop them from offering me first a monthly, then weekly column. The money wasn't all that great, but doors were opened. 2 years later, the email from the publishing company was a complete surprise. They wanted to see more of my work. They wanted to publish my book, which was non-existent at the time. I sent them an almost incoherent collection of essays. They sent me an editor who asked me to write an opening chapter on how my journey began. So I shared my story, for the first time, with an editor. Then nothing happened. Not for a few years, anyway. I assumed that it wasn't good enough, but I kept writing my blog. My column had an increasing popularity. The money was getting a little better, but I was bored. So I left again, this time heading for Europe. There are no hostels for 35-year-old men, no reduced fare train tickets, but I still crisscrossed the continent as cheaply as I could. I saw the things that I had only seen in textbooks or on television. I visited the places where history and traditions were born, and I didn't stop. From Europe, I made my way to the Middle East, then India. I spent 3 months in Asia. The languages, the culture, the food were all a new experience for me. I saw what it meant to truly be poor, not the shameful excuse that I had cursed. The people were the same though. People everywhere like to talk. I was 14 months into my latest journey and more than ready to return to the States when another email came with a preview of the cover of my book attached. That is when things got interesting. I flew home to a host of agents, editors, publishers, and lawyers. With the increasing popularity of my column, there was a buzz about my book. I turned that buzz into a fairly significant raise from the magazine, based mostly upon a convoluted ad revenue formula. It was more than I had ever made before and more than enough for me. So, I returned to my hometown to start a new life in the place I had grown up, grown to love, and missed a great deal.